Welcome, everybody. My name is Florence Hudson, and I'm delighted that I'm on the board for blockchain and healthcare today. So I have the wonderful opportunity every year to participate in Converge to Accelerate. And what I'm really excited about this year is my colleague and friend Shantanu Chakrabortty from Washington University in St. Louis is going to be talking about his technologies because this session is about quantum technologies and techniques for cybersecurity and healthcare. So Shantanu is an NSF funded researcher. He has other investments that are going into what he's doing. And he is a real leader in quantum tunneling based timer technology. And so we're looking forward to sharing these ideas with you. We would love on the back end if you want to communicate with us on LinkedIn or on Twitter to be able to talk about this even further, because we really think this is going to be very differentiating and help us with the future of cybersecurity and healthcare. So Shantanu, if you could introduce yourself a little bit and then take us through your presentation, and then we'll ask a few more questions on the back end.
Okay, thank you, Florence, for this invitation. So I'm Shantanu Chakrabortty. I'm a professor here in electrical and systems engineering at Washington University, St. Louis. And so today, I'm going to first describe a little bit of the work that we have been doing in the area of quantum-based technologies for cybersecurity. And this work has been previously funded from NSF. We have been working on this for about like 4 or 5 years. And it has come to the point where we are trying to deploy some of these systems in the real world. So, Florence, should I just start with the presentation?
Please do. Just go right ahead.
Okay. So I have a few slides that just gives you an overview of what the technology is about. And to just highlight and compare it what's already existing out there, a single visual that can summarize what the current technologies and their limitations are, it can be viewed through this, I would say, simple picture, which is a tablet. And the whole notion of security is for someone not to figure out what's engraved on this. And so if you don't have the Rosetta Stone or the adversary doesn't have the Rosetta Stone, the idea is that you cannot infer what's written on this tablet. Effectively, that's what most of the current technologies do. There are different names associated with it. So either they use some kind of a computational functions, cryptographic functions to make this harder for the adversary to decode, or you could use some kind of a physical unclonable function, which means that you use some nuances of hardware or idiosyncrasies of hardware to make or to encrypt the data before it is stored on a platform. Or you use some kind of a user-specific signature to, again, encrypt and secure the data. The problem with all these approaches are that they are inherently static. So they don't change with time. And because they don't change with time, that means that if your adversary has enough resources and computational power, there could be a mechanism by which you can reverse engineer what's being written on this tablet. So where we come in is we make each of these engravings dynamic in nature. So one can think that these little dots, they fluctuate with time. And so our solution in that regard is dynamic. So even if the adversary gets hold of one of these inscriptions or the data, it doesn't make much sense to them unless until you know how that dynamics is evolving. So what we also do is that we have this bunch of different timers or this time sensitive or engravings, and then we synchronize it with its software clone, which runs on a server, and only the user who has programmed these timers knows what the secret sauce is, what the underlying dynamics are, and so only if you have those two ingredients, you would be able to decipher what's written or what's actually stored on the substrate. The challenge, however, which we try to address in our research is how to make sure that the basic entity itself is secure. So we kind of have to put this in a safe where no one can access the information, the basic information, either using side channel or they intentionally or malintentionally try to tamper the content of these timers. And so this is where quantum technologies come in to secure some of the dynamics of these basic entities. So, so I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of the technology. It uses a phenomena called quantum tunneling. And using quantum tunneling, what we do is that we can eliminate the use of batteries. So we can make everything self-powered, practically zero power. So because it's self-powered, the technology itself doesn't have any power side channels. Because it uses few electrons, tunneling of few electrons, it doesn't generate any electromagnetic signatures. So it doesn't have an EM side channel. And then again, because of the quantum nature of the phenomena, if someone tries to manipulate the device itself, that changes the functionality of the device. So it makes it tamper-proof as well. So overall, when I try to explain this, like what does this technology, how does it relate to something that is out there? So this is the RSA key fob that many of us use it in two-factor authentication. We can think of this technology as an RSA secure ID on steroids, which means that you have about 10 to the power of 8 reduction in size. And there are a lot of features. So it's not just one clock. There are millions of clocks that are synchronized with respect to each other. It's self-powered. It doesn't require any batteries. And then it has a very unique feature, which is quantum-like. So if once you access one of the device, it kind of destroys itself. So in that regard, it's also quantum-like. So it allows only one-time read. So the hardware itself is not enough because it always has some quirks and idiosyncrasies. So if you want to create a complete solution, of course, you need to have some kind of a software. So we have a software stack that sits on this hardware, reads some of the tokens that are generated by the hardware, and then you provide an end-to-end security solution. So there are several different applications that are possible, and I'm just highlighting some of them here. You can create what's called a trusted platform module, TPMs. You can have data that automatically deactivate or disappears over time. So because everything is dynamic in nature, and this is where some of the privacy-related data could be useful. One-time passwords can be generated based on dynamics. You could use the same technology for distributing keys securely. You can use this for access control and authentication. And then, of course, if there are IPs on a hardware or in software that needs to be disabled over time, then you can use the same technology for doing that. Another variant, I would say, of the same method, but now instead of securing the timer completely so that you don't have any side channels, we can actually intentionally introduce some side channels intentionally by making some of these timers sensitive to environmental conditions like temperature, maybe an ambient Wi-Fi signal or vibration. And if we do that, then what we can do, we can use the same technology for securing supply chains. An example here is that if you send a bunch of these devices over a supply chain, at some point in time, if there is some kind of an event that happens on, so for example, the bunch of these timers experience a specific set of temperature, whereas another set of timers experience a different set of temperature, then by measuring how desynchronized these clocks are with respect to each other, because each temperature is going to change the profile of the clocks a little bit, you can figure out maybe did they go through the same supply chain or they experience the same temperature conditions or not. So using this technique, we can actually do lots of not just temperature, but you can monitor other environmental conditions. So this is time to temperature, it could be time to vibration, time to light. It all depends on how you change or modulate the clock itself. So where is it useful? We are living in a COVID era. So for example, in pharmaceuticals, one of the things that you want to ensure that the vaccines are always stored within a certain temperature compliance range. And so this is something that is useful there. Fish, meat, dairy products, again, for food products, this is useful. And one of the nice things about this technology is that it acts like a blockchain, because once you have stored the signature of the ambient condition, it's very difficult to tamper with it to so in that regard, it's always storing the signatures continuously. Okay, so if I compare where does this technology compare with for supply chain with what is out there. So there is this one technology which is based on batteries. Generally, they are big in size. There is this Wi-Fi based technology which is remotely powered. So Wiliot is one example. And then in our case, because everything is self-powered, doesn't require any external powering, it's always on, which combines some kind of a security and sensing together, and also it's low cost. So in summary, I feel, and this is my opinion, that if you use quantum primitives, what you can do is you can build a core hardware that is inherently secure. And using that core hardware, you can then build a software stack and other things that can then enable fast authentication and transaction. This is very important for some of the IoT applications. Because it has low computational requirements, you can use it for low resource settings. Ultimately, it's because it's a single chip solution, it doesn't require any batteries, it reduces cost. And then the same technology can be applied to small portable devices all the way to an enterprise scale devices, depending on how much complexity you want to build around it. So with that, I will hand over the mic to Florence. Florence, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Shantanu. That was excellent as always. So I have a couple of questions for our audience too, so they can understand the practical application of this. So when you were talking about, pharmaceuticals, the COVID vaccine, or food, where would this actually go? It would go on the packaging?
No. So the main attractive part of this technology is that it can allow vial level monitoring. So on every vial, you can put this, not on a big package. Because for vaccine, you have to ensure that every vial is compliant with respect to the temperature conditions. So it allows that level of granularity in terms of monitoring.
Okay, so it would go like on some type of writing that was on the vial or like right in the label?
No, so we were envisioning it's more on the cap.
Okay.
And so when somebody wants to determine if the vaccines were stored under right conditions, they can read the content of these devices and figure out whether it was always maintained at the same temperature level or did it go out of temperature compliance at any point in time.
Interesting. So would there be a separate device that would actually do the reading for them so they could see if there was an anomaly they have to worry about?
Yes. So there is a reader that needs to read the data.
What about for food? You don't put it right on the scallop or whatever you were showing, right?
No. So there are existing RFID based tags that go on food packages. So it will be more integrated with those systems. So it will be an add-on for food packaging. But technically, I feel that the form factor is small enough that you can always embed it as well. So then the issue becomes more of a readout. Like how would you expect a customer to know how to extract the data from here? So it becomes a different challenge.
It does. Well, that's the way new technology is, right? You fix one thing, you break another, or you have to think about another.
Yes.
So I love as you know, I've been interested in this technology since I met Shantanu a few years ago because he had NSF funded research in cybersecurity. I was working for the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at Indiana University at the time. And we were doing transition to practice workshops, talking about how do we bring this to the light of day. And it's come so far. I'm so excited about this. One of the things that's been happening at the same time in parallel is we've been building, as you know, you spoke on the standards working group call. We've been building a standard with IEEE and Underwriters Laboratory for clinical IoT and TIPS, we call it. So clinical Internet of Things devices, data and device validation and interoperability with TIPS, trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. So when I listen to you, I feel like you could actually maybe touch all of those letters. So maybe you can help us understand a little bit for people who talk in the trust and identity way, how this is kind of a solution there. The privacy of the data, and then of course, protection, safety, and security, I think are part of the brand promise you have for this technology right now. So can you talk about the different tips elements, please?
Yeah, so I think it would be a good way to highlight it through this slide, because the technology is a platform technology. All it does is provide a way to secure the core hardware, and then using that hardware, build a solution around it. So it completely depends on how you use those secure tokens that are generated by the hardware. So you could use those tokens to, for example, make the data disappear over time. So for example, if you have some user-centric data that can only be used for a certain duration, then you can use this technology to make the data disappear after a while. So that's one example. You could use some of these chips, because some of these chips you can manufacture them in large scale and relatively at much low cost. You can use them to distribute keys securely across multiple users. And why is that important? Because the key distribution is considered the hardest problem in cryptography. So once you have securely exchanged keys, then you can use the other cryptographic techniques for secure communications. So this technology can enable that aspect as well. And then, of course, access control, because again, we are using synchronization between multiple timers, that can also allow you to authenticate whether the timers that you have matches the timer that I have. And if both of these clocks match, then you can say that, okay, I can authenticate a specific transaction. Yeah, so in general, it can, because the technology is platform in nature, it can address each and every aspect of those cybersecurity research. Now, of course, there are limitations associated with it. So I'm not, so because this is hardware, so there are things that one has to take care of in terms of robustness. So for extreme harsh operating conditions, maybe that this may not be the right technology, things like that. But for medical devices, yes.
That's very cool. I'm really glad you brought up medical devices. That's what I wanted to talk about next. So from a medical device perspective, could this go on an implantable as well as on an external device?
Yeah. So implantable device, I feel that that's the ideal platform because they are more resource constrained. Mm-hmm. So, some of those implanted devices cannot run the entire cryptographic stack, for example. And then the security of those devices are more important compared to wearables to some degree, because in wearables, yes, if you don't authenticate one transaction, maybe with your Fitbit, it may not be such a big thing as opposed to your pacemaker or your artificial pancreas. So it for the implantable devices, yes, this allows you to provide a more secure and a solution that requires less computational power. Wearables, yes, because battery technologies are always going to improve with time. So maybe down the road, there would be solutions that are more energy efficient. So I feel that, yes, it will still work. The solution will still work, but it may not be like a must-have solution. It could be a nice-to-have solution in that case.
Well, it's very interesting because I remember the days when people would say, oh, low power, means it can't do anything. Mm-hmm. And look at this. This is amazing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things that I get out of, talking to you and learning more about your approach to quantum technologies and techniques is how that actually allows us to create very powerful low power solutions. Does that make sense?
Yes. So because at the core, we are using some of the quantum techniques to provide basic security primitives, like eliminating side channels, and because that is physics based, so you cannot fight with physics. But once you have the core, I would say, basic security available through hardware, then it's up to us how you can expand that security. You can make it more secure. You can provide different levels of security based on that. And that's the beauty of quantum techniques, is the physics itself provides that security.
Which is a beautiful thing. So one other question. So as we look into the future, and I know the way your brain works, and you look at the present and you look at the future constantly, and that's how you come up with great ideas like this and actually create it. There are two questions I have. One is, are you looking for people to partner with you to try out this technology?
Yes. So so we have several demonstration platforms. And some of my students, they are actively involved in commercializing this technology. So it would be always good to understand the other side of the equation, which is the application side of the equation, on where the need is, where the customer pain points are, so that we can tailor this stack. So the hardware remains the same, but then the software part keeps on changing based on different application needs. So yes, meaning that I think is our next goal, is to understand the customer pain points and then adapt this technology to fit the end application better.
That's wonderful. Well, I think this is a great audience to be sharing that with, because we are talking about healthcare devices, pharmaceuticals, and there are a lot of healthcare people in the audience. So that's really great. So thank you for sharing that. And then the other question I have is, looking into the future, where are some interesting places you see quantum techniques and technologies going related to cybersecurity and healthcare, or healthcare in general? Any thoughts you have on that?
So so security is a very, I would say, I shouldn't say nebulous subject. It's like, I think the most important part is the standardization of security. Once it's clear, like, how do you define security? Like when something is said, like, okay, this device is providing this level of security, then we can quantify if, for example, our technique can get to that level. So for example, what we can say, at least with the platform that we have, it's very difficult to tamper with our device. It's very difficult to get a side channel. Now, is it not possible down the road that there are other vulnerabilities that might show up? The answer could be yes, could be no, and that's true with any technologies. So like if it's denial of service attack, for example, right? Adversary might find a different way to figure out how to tamper with these devices. But at least what I feel is that if your security relies on quantum or physics based, it's very difficult to manipulate that. Then that's where the disadvantages of some computational techniques come in, is because it's very difficult to guarantee what will happen in the future. So if a quantum computer indeed becomes a reality, a lot of things will break apart. Well, maybe not. Again, that's where all the speculation lies. Now, medical devices, of course, are, I shouldn't say this, but it's generally considered the bottom of the totem pole, because they always, I feel, are catching up with what the state of the art is, because the first iteration is always, the security is always an afterthought. So sometimes it's better to have work with a platform that will kind of give you some level of security, rather than fix problems later on. So in that regard, also, I feel that our technology can help, because beforehand, looking into the future, quantum will give you some level of security. So you should expect the same to exist in the future as well. irrespective of whether the quantum computer becomes a reality or not becomes a reality.
Fair. Well, you've shown us that quantum tunneling timer technologies can be a reality, so that's really good. That's a good start. And I really love how you're helping us see how it can help us today, and then there's more opportunity in the future. So if anybody is interested in chatting with Shantanu, I don't know if Shantanu can perhaps share his email address. And if you're interested in participating in the IEEE UL standards work around the space of tips, trust, identity, privacy protection, safety, and security for clinical IoT, then you could reach out to me. I'm florence.hudson@columbia.edu. I'm Executive Director of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia, and I also lead the NSF-funded COVID Information Commons. So we live in this space, and we really want to help everybody be more safe and secure into the future. So thank you for joining us. And Shantanu, thank you as always for sharing your incredible research. And we wish you all the best. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Florence.